Well, guys, my next guest, you may not know this, but is a pioneer in the podcasting space. He's the co-host of the For All Nerds show, the voice of the urban geek. He is a DJ, a world-renowned DJ, and the writer, co-writer on the upcoming graphic novel, his debut project, Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze, which is out in stores August 27th. So here to talk to me, please welcome DJ Ben Ha Meen. How you doing, man?
Great, man. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Excited.
I'm excited to have you. You know what's crazy? So, in a past life, I was an intern at an indie label uh, based here in North Carolina, and the Combat Jack show just sort of became like required listening for us.
That's
Just
crazy.
in our daily travels, going to festivals and all the things. This would have been 2011 to like 2013.
hmm
And yeah, so it's funny just how immersed in that world I was because literally every week, new interview dropped. I'm like, all right, bet. And then, fast forward some years later, I've kind of been out of the music game for a little while and basically traded that hobby for comics.
hmm
And imagine my surprise when I realized that you are the same DJ Ben Ha Meen
Yeah, pretty
from the
much.
Combat Jack show. And I'm like, that's crazy. I guess because
hmm
I wasn't in the comics back then, it just never even occurred to me.
Oh wow.
Um,
So you got into comics like later in life?
yeah, I got into comics with House of X Powers of 10.
You're fucking kidding me.
No, dead serious. I
So you like never read comics before that?
like I'd had comics before, like
Yeah.
going to my grandma's house in New York, like comics were everywhere.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason in my head, comics only existed in New York. So I just I didn't have comics growing up like that. Like
That's so fucking funny to me because I grew up in Houston,
or
and yeah, all I had was comics. Like comics were before everything, before music, before anything. There was comics and role playing games. So
word.
that's crazy to me. And now you're talking to all these cats and shit. Like,
It's
wow,
fun. It
yeah,
is
that's interesting. That's
it's fun.
that's wild, man. My first X-Men was like right before the Mutant Massacre. You know what I
Mm,
mean?
yeah.
Yeah. And then House of X is like that's in my top, 10 comics of all time, probably. So I feel you. That's crazy to jump in right there. That's so interesting.
Yeah, man. It started.
Yeah.
I went out. I took my daughter to free comic book day because she's an artist, and so I was like, "All right, cool. Well, they're gonna have
Mm.
artists at this comic book store, so we can go there." And somehow I ended up with a weekly habit. I won a copy of House of X at like in a raffle a couple months later, and so then I went back to keep getting that story.
That's hilarious. So what made you start this show then and start talking to people?
So I was a YouTuber before
Okay.
this.
Yeah.
So I was in music industry. I
Yeah.
was doing like music marketing tutorials and stuff like that. Still
Yeah.
have that channel.
Yeah.
When the pandemic hit, I had been into comics for like a year at that point. But when the pandemic,
Sorry, it's so funny to me.
yeah,
No, because you've interviewed some great people. It's just like keep going. It's just like whenever you say for a year at that point, I'm like,
yeah,
like there were years I took off from comics, So it's
word,
like, yeah, all right, yeah,
yeah. But no,
yeah,
so I had been in the comics like a year at that point, and it was just a perfect storm. I was kind of
yeah,
growing disillusioned with the music industry, but I
mm-hmm,
still like making videos. So I told myself, well, I'll just make videos about comics, and while I'm sitting in front of the camera, I'll keep pumping out these music marketing videos to keep the
mm,
bills paid or whatever. And slowly but surely, everything on the music side just kind of fizzled out for me. And we're getting stimulus checks, so I'm buying more comics and just getting deeper and deeper into that world.
mm-hmm.
And stuff just kept rolling from there.
Wow, that's fire, man. Congratulations, that's really dope.
Thank you, man.
Yeah, that's really dope. Like, I'm laughing, but that's really impressive too. That's what I mean. And it goes like to what I always tell people, like, it's no time like the present to get into comics. And you can never I really dislike, even to the point of hate, gatekeeping and people who think oh, I've read this amount of comics because I probably read more than most of them. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't give a shit. You know, it don't matter how many you've read. It's like, you know, do you enjoy it or not? Do you like it? Why do you like it? You know, personally to you, that's all that matters to me. And that's all that should matter to anyone. So,
For
yeah,
sure.
that's fire.
Appreciate that. So
Hmm.
what about you? So you said you always had comics. What got you into them?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I've always been a reader. Like I was one of those kids who I don't remember not reading. You know, I was reading before kindergarten. I know that much.
Mm,
Like before I got to school, I was already reading. I can't remember when I started. You know, I don't know, but I just do not remember not reading, and I just constantly read. You know, I will read any and everything you put in front of me. Like my mom used to growing up, she had like all these different magazines, like Time, Harper's, just
mm,
everything, any magazine or periodical, Reader's Digest. I would read anything. You know, my mom was a lawyer, so I'd read her law books. You know,
mm,
it didn't matter if you put it in front of me, I would read it. And so, I started with before comics. I was playing like Dungeons and Dragons. That was my first geek thing was Dungeons and Dragons. And I don't know how me and my boy Zev, who's one of my best friends to this day, I've known Zev since first or second day of kindergarten. And I don't remember how we both got into Dungeons and Dragons, but I do remember somebody giving me a box of comics. And even before that, me just seeing it was always I'd go to the grocery store with my mom, and that's back when they used to have comics on the shelves.
mm,
And I would see comics and be like, yo, you know, like I'll never forget the X-Men that got me is there's an issue of X-Men where Wolverine is holding up Lightspeed, one of the members of Power Pack, who's a little
mm,
girl. And he's
mm.
got her up like this and he's got his claws out. And that imagery just blew my mind. You know, I was a kid, so I'm like, why is this grown man holding this little girl up like that with, you know, blades pointing out of his fingers?
Right.
And I didn't know any of it. And it was just, I had to find it out. And so it was just one of those things. I started picking up comics. And then I remember somebody gave me a little box. And then I found out about comic stores. And, you know, I started having a box at Nan's. That's my shop, or the shop I used to go to in Houston. And it was just one of those things. It was like comics and role playing games were just my life as a young child. Like that's just, and movies. Before everything was movies. Like I grew up on Star Wars and stuff, and I always wanted to be write or in direct films. That was just something I started off life pretty much with. So
Got you.
yeah.
Yeah. For me, I'm a 90s kid. So for me, it was animation.
Mm-hmm.
Like the way you're like, oh, comics was everything. For me, I was in front
Yeah.
of the TV. If it was animated, I was watching it.
Mm.
My house was the Disney house. My
Mm-hmm.
uncle lived across the street. His house was like where you got the Don Bluth movies and,
Oh, that's
whatever
awesome.
other stuff was coming out that
Yeah.
wasn't animated. And so it was animation and video games was our thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Same.
which is how I ended up, with a love for superheroes because I don't remember not seeing superheroes on TV. Like Batman animated series was on when I was in daycare.
That's yeah. So you're definitely younger than me. And for me, I remember when that came out, like my early shit like that was like Robotech, you know, seeing
Mm,
Robotech and Voltron. And then a little later was Akira and all that type of stuff that where I was just addicted to that. So that, but I always tell people like that. I can't imagine it because for us it was such a lack of stuff. Like me and my boy Zev, again, we used to go and rent um the DVD, not the DVDs, the VHS of like the old Fantastic Four cartoons from the 1960s because there was nothing that we could find, you know, and then where we were growing up, it was just a lack of stuff other than like Spider-Man and his Amazing Friends and stuff like that. So we were just looking for anything, you know, comic related. So we would
mm,
find old shit, you know. So I remember when Batman came out, I used to be watching, you know, after school. I'd come home, run home after school to watch Batman. Like that was the fiendish shit back then. So
right.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we always had superheroes. I think
Hmm.
for me, it was like Batman the animated series all the way up until I would say Teen Titans. It's probably the last time I was plugged in on a superhero animated show before like BET took over my life. Um,
See, I was so heavy on like Justice League and Justice League Unlimited are just two of the greatest shows ever to me. Like,
mm,
yeah. I missed the Superman era though. that's when BET was taking over my life during the Superman era and like
Right.
everything, and then Howard was taking over my life and all that type of shit. And it was like, but then Justice League, I came back for that. That was like the wire to me. I had to watch that shit.
Or yeah, for
Yeah.
me, it's funny because like now I love it, and being such a Dwayne McDuffie fan now, but
Yeah.
back then it was Batman or nothing. So I'm watching Justice League, but if I don't see Batman in the first 5 minutes, like nah. Like I remember that season premiere, and it was the Jon Stewart episode, and I was like, yo, this is boring.
And me, I was like, every week Justice League Unlimited was just blowing my mind. I don't even know if I knew Dwayne was doing it then, because I knew Dwayne from, back in the day, but I didn't make that connection. If I did, I remember it was like after he passed that I found that out. But I just knew that this was the greatest show that I'd probably ever seen as far as superhero shit.
Word.
Yeah.
So obviously you're a DJ, but you said you wanted to be a filmmaker, and you do work in writing in that way.
Yeah.
But how does DJing come up if you're such a nerd? It feels like music is absolutely nerdy, but it's just on the opposite spectrum. It's like I don't know, it's the cool thing to be a nerd about in a lot of ways. But how did that come into your life?
You said it right there. I was the opposite of that. I was a super dork. I was rhythmically challenged for a black person. Like I was a kid who could not even. I'll tell people I could not snap on beat 1, 2, 3, 4. I could not do it. Didn't even know. I couldn't count beat. It was weird. I think back to that how I like listen to music, and I don't really know how I heard it because I love music, but I like when people be like, snap to the beat, man. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I hear the song, what beat? There's a memory in I remember saying this to my older sister, what beat?
Wow.
And yeah, it's crazy to me, because I love the song, but I just, and it was one of those things. So, in high school, and it was straight up, it wanted to be cool. The DJ who would come DJ our school dances was setting up, and all the girls that I wanted to talk to were standing around watching him while he was setting up. And I was like, what the fuck? This dude ain't even doing nothing. And it was that, and it was DJ Premier of Gangstar. Because Premier would scratch, and it was like, I was just listening today, like, can we hear your funky scratching again? And I just like, how's that motherfucker talking through his hands, And that was... I was obsessed with the sound of scratching. Once I realized what people were doing with it, I was just obsessed with it. And so it was those two things. It was wanting girls and being obsessed with music, like in a weird way, like in a nerdy way. And then once I did 1 or 2 parties and like really did a party and people started screaming, that became an addiction that I, to this day I can't get past. Like, rocking parties is it's something that I just love, beyond anything. And it's just shaped me in so many ways. Like I was on a show before just talking about how I've never been fearful of being in like pitch rooms or being in writers' rooms or pitching ideas to people because I've DJ'd and I've pitched my ideas to people most of my life, like playing a song is just pitching an idea. Like, do you like this?
Right.
And I've had the boo, enough times where it's like, that doesn't matter to me, fuck your boos. I'm playing this shit. I felt like it, and I'm going to figure it out and we're going to get back to where we're going either way. So it's the same thing with writing or pitching to me. It's like, it's not very fearful. So DJing has just shaped my life and helped my life. And, I told someone today, if not for DJing, I would be a very weird person. I'm still a very weird person, but outside, I can portray a different persona.
Yeah, no, I feel like being in front of a camera makes me less weird, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm applying my weirdness through a very specific skill. And like people can see, oh, you got a YouTube channel, oh, you got this many subscribers or whatever. But it's like, I'm a nerd. So
that's the other side of it too. It's like what I learned when I first started For All Nerds was I remember a woman, I was dating at the time was like, yo, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about, but I like this,
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, okay. Because they were like, you're confident in what you're saying, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You're talking about things you know. And so that really was, I was like, oh shit, I can do this, you know? So,
Right.
and I was already, you know, used to being in front of a camera, just used to being in front of people from DJing and from Combat Jack, et cetera. And just my whole life, I've done interviews that, you know, going back to high school, I was interviewing people, et cetera. So that side of it was easy for me. It was just more to accepting that being a nerd is cool now. So anything I talk about, people are gonna like. That was something I was like, oh shit, this is dope, you know.
Right.
Because now I can rattle off, you know, the Marvel universe off the back of my head, and people are like, wow, you know. Before it's like fucking nerd, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think even the reason I fell into music so hard was because like I'm in middle school when like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and all that like hit.
Mm,
And like there was just a very specific group of people that latched on to that stuff. And
hmm
those weren't really people you want to be associated with necessarily. Like if you're trying to have cool points, right? With jokes on me though, because we all secretly loved it all. But
hmm
um, but yeah, so it was that, but then it was also like the Toonami anime wave. And so
hmm
it's like you got like the super medieval magic kids on one side, and you got like the silk shirt anime kids on another side. And then it's like kids wearing Jordans and athletes, and that's the layout of high school
hmm
of middle school, high school, whatever. But anyway,
Yeah,
I fell
mine
into
was
music
like
because that was cool.
yeah, mine was it was there was nobody wearing anything nerdy, you know, my point. It was
Mm,
just like if you wore that shit, you were like you were me. You were ostracized, you know,
right.
and then it was and then once I started DJing, people were like, oh, Ben's all right. You know, that's pretty much how
Right.
my high school experience went. You know, it was
Mm,
like and I was smoking weed and they were like, oh, weed's cool now, you know. So, you know, they fucked with me for that. But then it was, you know, I was DJing parties and, you
yeah.
know, it's like suddenly you're a cool kid, you know, like you rock a party and people are like, you know, oh shit, you know, so yeah,
Right.
that definitely I always say, you know, hip hop and DJing saved my life. Definitely.
Word. Now, this is not to age you, right? But it's just curious, right? You're starting out DJing. Are you carrying crates? Is this CDJs? Because I feel
I'm
like
definitely
Serato
carrying
wasn't.
crates. Yeah, I'm definitely
Word.
carrying crates. I don't even, you know, that I'll keep my age a secret, but I was carrying fucking crates. You know, like I earned that. Yeah. I don't even yeah. I've been DJing since it was just crates pretty much. So yeah.
Word. So, second question then. How in the world do you come up with the money to buy two turntables and a mixer and a gang of records to rock parties with?
I didn't um I started off on turntables and a mixer that were ridiculously cheap. I had two turntables that each one I think was $20 or $30 each at the most. That's how I did my first party on two of those, and my mixer cost $100 from like the back of the source.
Wow.
Or no, no, I didn't even get that one from the source yet. I got my first mixer from the same place I got my turntables. I didn't even think it had a fader. It was just up and down um volume levels on it. But you could,
Got you.
you know, semi mix with that. And I mean you could actually mix very well if you were good, but I was terrible. So I was just playing records. So it's
Mm,
just like, you know, it didn't really matter. So I was playing records and just hoping for a reaction at that point. And so I built up from that. That's how I did it. I did parties. And it was like when I first went to college, I had one 1200 at that point. That's
mm,
how struggle it was. And I had another, I think I had the 1500 at that point, and other techniques, but it was garbage.
mm.
And then I kept building up till I got 1200s. Yeah. It
Word.
was, yeah, it was a long, and it's been up and down shit. I've had times when I ain't have them since then. So, you know, life will throw you curveballs.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
So you're at Howard, which
hmm
I didn't go to an HBCU. I won't shout that out, but I what I of all I know about Howard is Howard Homecoming. You got to go to
yeah.
Howard Homecoming, right?
Have you ever
And
been?
I have not.
Oh,
Although I got a little cousin at Howard now. Maybe I'll
yeah.
make that a thing.
This the 100th year too. You might need to make it this year, fam. It's the
Word.
100th homecoming. It's supposed to be, you know, yeah.
So being a DJ at Howard, that's got to be like a celebrity experience if you've ever had one.
Somewhat. I've had bigger celebrity experiences being a DJ. It was the biggest school for DJing that I'll ever think. That was what the craziest shit for me was, because like I said,
Mm,
I wasn't technically good at that point. I was emotionally good. Like I knew how to rock a party. I knew how to create a vibe. That was
mm,
something I just knew how to do from pretty much instinct, with music. I
mm.
could put 2 or 3 songs together and make a vibe, but I could not blend. I couldn't do shit, as far as DJing. I was drop it on the one and keep it moving. That was pretty much my whole style.
Right.
And and probably half the time not even on the one, because I was just so fucking, I was weird. But I was making it work. Like I was rocking parties and people were booking me back then. But then I got to Howard, and there are like 5, I think, DJs in my dorm. My RA was a DJ. Across the hall from me is my brother, DJ Trauma. We're brothers to this day. And that, he's another DJ. Up the block from us, we were in Drew Hall. Up the block from us is my man DJ Supreme, who was like literally had just won the world championships like the year before that.
Mm,
And then Young Guru was there, Young Guru, Jay-Z's engineer. And
yeah.
Guru is like a few years ahead of me, and he's running the campus. So it was so much comp. I had to instantly get better. And that's why I say that. But I wouldn't say, I mean, it was as much celebrity as anything. I think, it was like it became a bit of a celebrity thing, I guess. Yeah, I would say. Yeah. But DC, all that was like that, especially then. DJs, it wasn't like now when there's a million DJs. So it was like you were more rare, and it was respected, and it was like, yeah, it was a fun time. I'll say that.
Right. Like I guess the word that came to mind was celebrity, but what I'm thinking about is like that moment, right, when Richie Rich brings the kids in and they're like, "Yo, you got a McDonald's in your house." Like I feel like that's what it's got to feel like being a DJ at a party school.
Oh, it was like DC was just something else in general. That's what it
Mm,
was. It was
mm,
like, I was there during the time of like the Love nightclubs and stuff like that. So it's like, and during that time, Love is the most well-known. Dream Love is the most well-known. But during that time, there's like 5, 6, 7 major clubs open in DC that are like thousands of people. And Love was just one of the craziest, because it's a beautiful interior, and it's 3,000 Black people,
mm,
every weekend.
yeah.
So it's something I've never seen before and probably will never see since. And so that was stupid. Like that was a stupid time to be alive, to be a DJ, to be anything. Like, yeah, Howard Homecomings, like I've seen Biggie walk across the yard. It's different. Drake was there more recently. Like it's just, DC Howard is a different place to this day. It's
Mm,
it's changed, but it's still different,
yeah.
It's so Black and so musically inclined, everything. I was just in Philly last week DJing a party down there, and that shit still, I don't know, Philly, DC, the DMV type area. That shit it's one of my favorite places to be a DJ. Definitely.
Now, this is an aside, but you brought it up. So, right, like we're in the internet age. So like
Mhm.
music is homogenized to a great degree,
Oh
right?
yes. Hmm.
Like, but you're talking about traveling and DJing. Like, so to what
Yeah.
degree are you still seeing like regionalism as it pertains to music or like rocking parties?
Oh, it's still there. It's still there. It's not as pronounced, but it's definitely there. And it's definitely like, because you'll go to different regions and there are still songs that will never reach the mainstream of like, another region. So that's still something. And then just different records work in different places differently than they do, you know, like it just depends on what city you're in. Like because I was in Philly, I knew I could play, like at the peak of the night, I could play What We Do, the freeway joint.
Right.
And I knew it would go off like a bomb. Like I played it right after Not Like Us. You know what I mean? So I
Hmm.
went from like the biggest current record to, a record that's 20 something years old now,
Right. Right.
and it didn't matter because it was like, this is their record.
Yeah.
So, I knew that would work for, because I was in Philly. And so it's shit like that, that you can do that, yeah. So it's
Yeah.
still, it's still very much because like when you go to the West Coast, my West Coast set is 100% different than what I play on the East Coast to this day. Like I
Mhm.
was on the West Coast last year doing a party, and I was like, I said on a mic, I came all the way out here just so I could play some of this shit,
Right.
so I can play like J Rock,
Mhm.
heavy, like he got this joint with Jeremiah that I really don't play out here, but I
Mhm.
tap out. Like I knew that shit would go off, and it went off that night. Like, man,
Nice.
yeah,
Nice. No,
yeah.
that's dope. Um, so with all that being said, right, I introduced you earlier as like a pioneer in the podcast space. It's not an exaggeration to say that without the Combat Jack show, I would absolutely not be doing what I'm doing now. Right. Like you asked
Mm,
me, like, well, you got this show now. Like what, how do you have it? Right. For
mm-hmm,
me, listening to Combat Jack and some other shows,
mm-hmm,
like, but I really just kind of fell in love with the art of the interview. I don't know if there was anybody who would make people feel comfortable and
mm-hmm,
ask insightful questions while having fun the
mm-hmm.
way that Combat Jack did.
Yep.
Um, can you talk a little bit about just your time on the show and just your experience with Reggie?
Oh man, it's just I mean, I'm sitting here looking at my Dallas Penn shirt in front of me. It's interesting, like, because that's something that a lot of people didn't know. Like, I was always doing interviews. Like, I'm about to start releasing a lot of this footage. Actually, I got it digitized. We're just trying to figure out how to do it. But like, me and my sister started in high school when in the '90s in Houston, we were just doing interviews. Anyone who came to town, we would find a way and interview them. So I have like footage of interviews with all kind of rappers and stuff like that. So I was always doing that, and I've always been. It's funny, me and Reggie met, way later in life, but we both had the same type of influences. Like I liked Howard Stern for his interviews. I didn't really like his humor, but I liked like
Hmm.
the long form interviews he would do. I liked Playboy magazine, reading interviews in Playboy where they would, have like the shit would be like 8-9 pages talking to somebody.
Hmm.
I'll never forget growing up reading the Jordan joint in there. And I know people like Playboy, no. Playboy interviews was the bomb back in the day. Like, I never read interviews like that. And so I was always a fan of stuff. I love documentaries. I love pretty much that was just part of me, from a very early age as well. And then comedy is the other thing that I'm a big fan of that I really study is like stand up. Like I'm a Richard Pryor, just I think he's God on earth,
Hmm.
when it comes to the mic. And then I think Chappelle, Eddie, Chris when they're on, but like, Chappelle's another one for me. It's like him, Carlin, and Pryor, are just the gods.
Yeah.
And so humor, and being quick witted is something I've always studied. So that goes all back to being said, like what happened with combat was, long story short, was I was doing a blog at the time. I had a blog, Please Don't Stare, which just like you, I was inspired by Nah Right. I remember I was one of the people in Nah Right's comments every day,
Mm.
talking to every different person in there. And then I'm sitting there like, I can do this. I know all these people that he's blogging about, like I'm DJing at a club every week where all these people are at. Like,
Word.
and then I've met a lot of these people already just through my life. I know some of these cats personally,
Mhm, mhm,
And so I was like, I could do a blog. So I started a blog, and then me and Combat, I would post his stuff, etc. And one day I posted a video. Like I say, I was at the club when Jay-Z and Jeezy performed My President is Black for the first time. I'm standing right behind them and we shoot that shit. I
mm,
put it on my site the next morning. It blows the fuck up. By that night, Bill O'Reilly has used it in his broadcast and dissing these rappers. Look at these Negroes rapping about my president is black. So
right.
Combat gets my info from Bill. I mean, not from Bill, from SJ and Not Right. We talk. We try and sue Bill. It doesn't work out. We become chill. I start posting his blog. When he starts doing the show, I'm posting it on my joint. And then one day I just hit him up and was like, yo, let me come through. And he was like, sure, do it. And it just went from there. And so I guess that's not long story short, but really it's just one of the, like, it's hard for me to talk about him. Really, it's like that shit just changed my life. It it saved my life in a lot of ways. It kept me in New York. It made me, it just, you don't realize it. It's hard to talk about fate and choices you make and how much they can impact you. And I often say that, I even think I have a poem about it. It's like, where it's like, you don't know until the end of it. And but that choice has just done so much for me. And then it just helped me so much. Like, it was a really rough time in my life. I just come from incarceration. I come from a lot of things. And, it's like you had to be live on the air week after week with Reggie goading you on, like, Ben, talk about jail, Ben, talk about this, Ben, do this, and so it was just one of the best times of my life. And those people involved are my family, to this day. I think of Reggie and Dallas, just like I think of my parents who have passed. It's just, they're just part of my ancestral history now, like I ask them questions. I talk to them all the time. Like, man, it's a lot of things I do just to impress them still to this day. Like the same way I do things to, make my parents proud. Like, it does not stop. So I just believe, we got to keep doing it, because what would Combat and what would Dallas do,
Right.
And it's just
Right.
weird. Because it's weird, like, sorry to just hear, like, even you, like, it's so interesting because, especially when it was Combat, it was just, we were just doing this shit. And so to hear somebody be like, oh yeah, I was listening to y'all every week, that's like fire and so crazy to me, because it's like, we were just doing it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're two hip hop kids. I think I'm taking for granted that the audience knows who Combat Jack is, right? So just for you guys, the Combat Jack Show was like the hip hop podcast before hip hop podcasts.
Yeah.
Like back when it was called internet radio and people weren't recording in their houses, they were going to studios to record and put out these shows every week. Like,
live. We were live.
Oh,
wow.
A
lot of people aren't. Yeah, a lot of people aren't now. Like, we were Wednesday, we would, and we had the illest time schedule. We were midnight Eastern time, Wednesday night. Combat would come drive by my house. We both lived in Brooklyn. He'd come drive, pick me up. We'd drive down to PNC Radio, which is down by the water in Brooklyn, and find part. I mean, this motherfucker would get me 11:55. We running up the stairs 11:59. A-Keen's inside here and record. I mean, start live 12:01. We are live on the air, and it's, what are we talking about tonight? And it was just like that. So it was craziness.
Like, from my vantage point, without Combat Jack, we just don't have podcasting the way we have it, right? Like, every rapper's got a podcast, every athlete's got a podcast now, right? Like that, those trees start there. Like, from my perspective, podcasting was like Serial, like those true crime dramas and stuff like that. Like, but as far as this current, like, let's get on a mic and just talk about what's happening today in the news, or let's go meet up with somebody dope and get their story, like, that wasn't really happening like that.
No. And that was very intentional by Combat. Like, Combat said, I want to create like the Black Howard Stern show, is what he would call it. He's like, I'm going to get a bunch of characters, I'm going to get a bunch of different people. And then we were both very intent on doing that long form interview, not about what your latest project was about, but just about you. And that was something, because that's something I've been doing. Like I say, if when I start releasing some of these old interviews I have with people, it's just, I was always doing, trying to get the most, longest interview I could out of people, because I knew that way you could get the most information. And, I didn't want to talk about the same dumbness that every other magazine was talking about. Oh, what's your new album about? I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to get some real shit, so we were both intent on that. Yeah. And that's the other thing about the Combat Jack Show. Everyone who, pretty much all the major people right now, as far as hip hop, Joe, Nori, they all came through our show. They were all guests on the show. They all saw it. Melissa Ford was on the show. All these people, or they were like you, who were people out there listening to the show, and so it's interesting to me to see all these cats do it. But at the same time, I know that we aren't here doing it, so I can't be mad at them. But yes, for listeners who don't understand that, if you go watch the Joe Budden show, it's like watching the Combat Jack show, but I don't think it's good, I once asked, I recently asked Matt Raz, was he Sparks or Sparks him or was he Sparks or Rory? I also said we were ahead of the game because we had 2 token white boys. We had Premium Pete and Matt Raz.
That is hilarious.
We had 2 token women. Shout out to Jazz Fly, rest in peace, and NY Delight. So we were ahead of the game. We had 2 token women, 2 token white boys. Like we were different. These cats still can't catch up to us.
Right. No, that's crazy. No, I love what you said about long form interviews, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, because my goal every time I sit down and talk to somebody is like, for the audience, you don't have to listen to another interview from that person. Like, I want my conversation with you to be like the definitive conversation. If somebody's like, dang, such and such is no longer with us, well, at least we have this interview with BJ, right? Like, that's types of conversations.
Lofty.
It is lofty, and I'm certainly not successful every time, or maybe even most times.
No, but that's a good goal to have.
The goal.
Yeah, we always try. On For All Nerds, we've always, our favorite moment, and we've had it happen much more than once, is somebody saying this is either the best interview I've ever done, or one of the best interviews I've ever done. And we've definitely got that on tape from a few famous people. So.
Right.
And I've been told that by other people who know people. So it's like, that's what we go for as well. We just want, we want people to really not, think that it's, we different. If you're talking to us, it's something different.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of, right, let's talk about Fan Bros. How does that get started?
Well, like you said, the old name, like the dead name, is pretty much Fan Bros.
My bad.
Yeah. All good. We try to keep it, straight. So we started off, and once again, that comes through Combat Jack. Like I say, everything, so many moments in my life is because of this dude. But his actual name for it was the Boom Bap Biff Show, and I was like, Negro, please, like.
I get it.
I get it. Boom bap Biff,
and you got the sound effects.
Yeah, I get it, but no, I was like, Negro, please, that ain't working. And we did an episode or so as Fan Bros when it was like me, him, Chico, and I want to say Sean Price was on that one too. Rest in peace. And I was like, ain't no way. I was like, I'm not listening to a bunch of dudes. It's just terrible. But it started off basically, Combat was like, yo, he got it. Like, Combat saw the future. He was like, hip hop, comics, there's a connection there. People aren't exploring it. We need to talk about it. Let's do another show. I was like, word up. And it was very interesting to me because I'd been blogging at the time, and it was getting to the point, and even on the Combat show, where we were getting popular enough where, like, the big incident for me was when we had an episode where Combat went off on Papoose. And for Combat to be getting threats, and for me to know that I lived in Brooklyn, and Papoose ain't far from there, and I'm like, and it was the same thing with my blog where I couldn't be like, yo, this album's whack,
right?
And then I would have to worry about some rapper being mad at me. I was like, I can't do this much longer, So when Combat was like, let's talk about comments, I was like, well, that's cool, because if I say this comment's whack, what writer gonna step to me? I'll slap a nigga,
Right.
like, it's a rare comic writer, I'm sorry, who I feel threatened by,
Right.
Dwayne McDuffie was probably, that was a big man, so he was a different, that's one of the few, but, it ain't many, so I was like, I can talk whatever shit I want about comics, they ain't gonna say nothing to me. So I was like, let's do it. So we started that, and we started off as Fan Bros, and quickly, I was just like, this is weak. Honestly, I don't want to sit here and listen to dudes talk about comics too much. So I put out a call on Twitter, and I was already following both of them, and they were kind of following me too. I was Tatiana King and Jamie Rigetti, and Chico Leo, who was, part of the original. He knew them both too. But I never heard them speak, nothing. We both brought them both on the show, and it was the 4 of us, and we were just like, okay, they're great. And so the 4 of us kept going. And then from then it just evolved, and we had different hosts, and, we had a name change where we went from Fan Bros to what we are now, the For All Nerds Show. And it was that was always in it because that's fan, For All Nerds was in it.
Yeah.
It was just we wanted to distinguish to make sure that people understood, because fan bros started becoming this limiting thing. People would always question us, "Oh, you bros, why is Tatiana here?" And so all that type of thing. So, and it was like, and we wanted people to understand we are for all nerds. Like while we are black as fuck and we come from a people of color perspective, we are encompassing of everyone. And it goes back to that thing like I was talking about earlier. I don't care if you've read one comic book, no comic books, or a million comic books. You can come listen to our show and we can talk about comic books. I don't care if you've seen, if your first MCU movie is Deadpool and Wolverine, or you've seen them all 50 times. We can talk about the MCU. That's how we try and approach things. We're not some exclusive, we are all inclusive. That's how we always look at it. And so it just went from there, and it became the same thing with the Combat Jet show. It's like, that's a secret I'll tell the world. It's like, Combat once told me that his show was not about being about a hip hop rap show. It was about showing people the keys to success. So if he's like, if we show people someone's life story, they'll see all the ways they achieved their success. So it shows them the different keys, and it shows all these different paths. So that's how I always took it for all nerds. Was like, we'll interview this rapper, and talk to them about hip hop and geek them and how they interrelate, and then they'll see it. Or we'll interview this director and how they got that far in life, and boom, boom, boom. And they'll see a way to become a director. They'll see a way to become a screenwriter. They'll see a way for this. And so it was all those type of things that I put into the show, and that's how we started. And when we started, it wasn't like now where it's like, you have your channel, there's this channel, there's that channel, there's all these channels. We were one of the, like, just as with Combat Jet Show, For All Nerds was one of the pioneering, and is one of the pioneering, comic book podcasts, YouTube channels, whatever you want to call it, because we were just one of the originators. And to this day, I'll be honest, I just do not feel like we are often imitated but never duplicated. Like, there's just not much like me and Tatiana out there. And I think the problem is a lot of people still rely on too many dudes. Like, people be having like 4 or 5 dudes on a show, and I'm like, and that's it, or one token woman. And it's like, you got 4 dudes and 1 woman, like, you're never gonna hear the woman talk. So what's the point? Like, I've had, it's always been me and Tatiana pretty much from the jump, or me, Tatiana, and Chico, me or Jamie as well. And then I often try and bring in as many women, LGBTQ, whatever. I don't give a fuck, you know what I mean? Because I just want to hear different people's takes, and I don't want to sit there talking to dudes all day. So, this is cool. It's, 1 dude, but when it's 3, 4 dudes, like, arguing about a movie, like, ugh. Yeah. Like, no. And then they get all nerdy about shit, and it's like,
no. Somewhere in this RSS feed is what I call the 0 issues, like my manifesto on what I wanted this show not to be.
Yeah,
I wasn't sure what this show would look like before it became an interview show, but I was just like, I just didn't want. I felt like comic book podcasts, by and large, are just like a few guys in a room, just being weird, like
being nerds, and being angry and being all this shit, and I ain't got time for none of that. I'm here to crack jokes. I'm here to be witty as fuck. I'm here to be fly. That's the other thing. Like, cats ain't fly. And that just ain't me. Like, I come from DJing. I come from hip hop. Like, it ain't. You got to be fly, fam. And like,
Now, I'll ask you this. So, because I make my entry into comic books and in comic book media post Comics Gate, right? You were there before that, right? For me, a lot of the reason why I even do this is because I'd be watching a comic book review, and it would start out as a normal comic book review, and then it would just end with like, why are there so many black people? And she's a lesbian.
That's fucking hilarious. Nigga just wanted to read about watch somebody talk about Fantastic Four, and then they gotta be like, fuck your blackness. I was really enjoying your channel, fam.
I was. And then it was. It got weird, but no, like in seriousness, that is what would happen. That'd be my experience, right? So
Because I just did I did not pay no mind, So like, I don't because I don't watch no review. That's the other thing. Like people, I don't watch much podcasts. Like because it's like because I'm always doing them, and then I definitely don't watch nerds because it's always some nerds who get weird, even if they ain't racist. They just get weird, So it's just like I can't watch these stats. Yeah. So how did it feel to be part of it? It's interesting because at not at Comic State, at San Diego Comic Con, I did a panel, and one of the questions was, how do you feel about these anti-DEI initiatives? I had to remember how to spell it, right? DEI, right? Yeah, because I just don't give a fuck. And that's what I said on the panel, and it was like, nigga, they give me a different name every few years. 1 year I'm a diversity hire. 1 year I'm DEI. 1 year I'm anti-Comic State. 1 year I'm this. And every year to me, it's white people and white men, especially, being idiots. And they gonna be idiots to the end of time. And I'm not gonna give a fuck. So I guess Comic State was more interesting because it was more on point. But we personally, I never got like bombarded with attacks. I would say fuck y'all to their face. And they just would mostly keep quiet for me. I got more attacked for being like anti-recast T'Challa than I did for being anti-Comic State. I'll be honest, like, but but that's the same. I feel, and that's what I'll say. That's what I say about all these movies. I always say, whenever you put your ideology online as like this is what it is, it's very stupid, and it becomes your whole life because you can't go back on that now.
Right.
Like that was my thing with the recast T'Challa people. I'm like, it's like no matter what type of logical reasoning you put to them, they're gonna just feel this way, and or anyone to feel anyway. And that's why I'm trying to and not be like, I don't really have an ideology other than don't be stupid and don't like attack other people, don't do things that hurt other people. Beyond that, it's like just enjoy what you enjoy. My whole recast T'Challa, not caring for it, was more like, I don't really like, once Kugler and them said they were doing something that's, I don't really like people telling creators what to do. Either choice was fine with me. It's just, if they recast them now, I'm fine with it. I really don't care. That's why they just don't tell creators what to do. And Comic Shade was just one of those things where it's like, I look at it now, like they're still going, and it's just like, oh, look at y'all,
Right.
But y'all can't even make good comics. Like, who cares? Like, and, sure, you're going to get a lot of money funding you because racists always have money, and there's a lot of white men in this country. So it's like, and white men make a lot of money. So, yeah, I don't know. To me, it's more like just, oh, that's cute.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Word.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, that's more like, how was it? Did you get attacked?
I didn't get attacked. People are slick. Right? Like,
yeah.
They think they're slick, right? Like, I think the worst I got, because, I started my channel during the pandemic. So everybody's numbers were booming, or at least mine were, because I was posting every day. And somebody put in my comments one time, like, he's only getting this many views because he's black. And I'm like, well, that's weird. Like, because who's typing in black guy reading comics into YouTube? So, but yeah, but that's the worst that I've got. Now that I post interviews, every now and then, like, depending on who I'm talking to, you'll get a horde of people that are like spewing stuff at that specific creator. I had Jeff Thorne on last week. I haven't checked for the Hal Jordan police yet, but I'm sure they're in the comments of that one because.
Oh, yeah. I forgot they're mad at him. Fuck Hal Jordan. No shots. That was my Green Lantern growing up. No, he wasn't. Guy Gardner was always my Green Lantern. Fuck Hal Jordan. And I was never a John Stewart fan either. I can't lie.
Where I like John Stewart from the show.
Yeah, definitely from the show. But from the comics, it was like, that nigga was trifling in the comics, so it was tough to love him.
Word. Yeah. I don't know. So I've been testing this one-liner. Let's go ahead and we're out here now. So I feel like Hal Jordan's superpower is white privilege, and they call it willpower. And it makes me mad.
Well, I've got this whole concept for a Green Lantern or Green Lantern-esque comic that I can't reveal right now because I'm definitely going to do it at some point in the future. So, yeah, that's part of it. That's definitely part of it. Yeah,
his superpower is the audacity, right? Yeah. Like, and it's like, yo, like, I just don't understand. Like, I'm reading this new run, and everybody's praising it like, yo, this is just like Top Gun. And I'm like,
That's not
that
a
was
good idea.
Tom Cruise's superpower too,
Yeah.
was the audacity. That's not something to aspire to, but whatever.
Not at all.
Off my soapbox. I just had to get that out because we were going down that road. So here we are.
all good. All right, go ahead.
So, oh God, this is hilarious. Um, all right. So you've been in television writing, you've been in DJing, you've been in creative media your whole life, right? But
Mm-hmm.
now you've got your first graphic novel project. And it's about a musician, which I guess some people would be like, of course it's about a musician, right?
Right.
But
Convenient.
right. But
that's what I said. I was like, word, perfect. Yeah.
but it's about but the book is about Jimi Hendrix, who it's funny because like I read it and I loved it, but Jimi Hendrix is one of those figures that you kind of learn about as a historical figure,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you learn about him almost as like a symbol, right? And but not necessarily in the way that you learn about other Black heroes, right? Like he's not necessarily viewed historically, well, depending on what circles you're in, as like a Black pioneer of anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like, oh, that's that dude that all the white people like. And there's the psychedelic colors, and he lit the guitar on fire and did the Star Spangled Banner. And that is what we generally know about Jimi Hendrix.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I didn't really learn about Jimi Hendrix until I was an African American history major in college. So
Nice.
we had to take a, Blacks in Music class. And my professor, Dr. Frank Woods, taught us all about the history of Jimi Hendrix and he goes on this whole spiel like, like you think this is a white icon. Let me show you where he got all his roots, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's with the Isley Brothers, and he's with Little Richard, and he's with all these different soul acts, and then decides to kind of venture out, in search of other audiences or other sounds. And y'all just kind of disowned him after that, but he's always Black, right? And what's funny is I like the way this book, the way it's laid out here, right? So when I saw Jimi Hendrix Purple Rain, just the cover, right, I thought it was one thing, and it's not, right? So there's a book that came out last year. It's called Miles Davis and the Search for the Sound.
I've been waiting to read that.
It's very good.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
But it ended up, I read it super late last year, and it ended up like, it might be my number 1 or number 2 somewhere in there of 2023. But it's very much like a biography comic, like a biopic in graphic novel form. And it's pieced together from like old interviews and different conversations and stuff. So it's a book told from Miles's perspective about his sort of life journey. And so when I saw this, I just assumed it was that, but for Jimi Hendrix. And this is very much not that. Can you talk about like kind of the basic premise for this book and how it came about?
All right, that's 2 questions, right? And I'll go with how it came about first.
Okay.
So the premise is interesting, and since you've read it, it's easier to describe, but it's for people who haven't read it, it's kind of difficult for me to describe, and that's what I've been always working on my elevator pitch for it.
Right.
But even though it's already finished and done. How it came about is, like you said, I've written in television before. Me and another one of my best friends, brothers, whatever, is a man named Mello Brown. And I met Mello on Twitter in like the early days of Twitter. And it was just one of those things, we clicked instantly. I remember I think the first thing he tweeted to me was like, yo, man, you're mad funny on here. And I was like, fuck you, dude, because now I got to keep this up every day, I was like, I'll never forget that. I was so mad at him. I was like, oh man, somebody thinks I'm funny on here. Now I have to, try and keep this fucking, weird lines. I've been just all, early days of Twitter, I would just spit anything that came to mind. So it was like somebody who had found anything I said funny was somebody who really got my humor. Cause I was really just, going off my head and it'd just be shit that I found hilarious. So we just clicked instantly. We both found out we wanted to work in Hollywood. And so we started writing scripts on the side. Then that was, early before anything happened for us. And then it was like I did Combat Jet, did For All Nerds. And at one point through doing For All Nerds, I had an opportunity to pitch to work on American Gods. Because, some things I'd met Brian Fuller and, we got close to him and started speaking with him and boom, boom, boom. And I'll be honest, y'all, just for anyone listening, this is one of those things where people talk about like manifestation and shit like that. It was like a lot of things with For All Nerds, especially I did because I was like, this will work for me to get here. I was like, I'm going to do this show and interview every showrunner until one of them gives me a job. That was pretty much my goal for that year for All Nerds. Was like, I'm going to have every showrunner on here. One of them should give me a job. And it happened. So, you can make things happen if you really believe them. And I honestly didn't even believe it. It was one of them things I just kept saying it. And Tatiana would be like, you kept saying this shit, and it was like, I guess I did believe it, It was like, I didn't think about it was what it was.
Right.
Because she was like, you kept saying that shit. And I was like, well, I was determined, I guess, but whatever. So we managed to get on American Gods. We worked on that together. We both get fired at the same time. I come back to New York and go back to work, doing all kind of things and occasionally pitching and stuff. Mello gets another job writing on TV and he keeps going. He eventually, through that, lands the gig where he wrote Blade Runner Origins, which was the origin story for Blade Runner for comic books. And he writes that, starts writing more Blade Runner comics, and all this is for Titan Publishing. And so a few years back, Mello hits me up and he's like, yo, Titan asked me to pitch on this Hendrix story. They're working with the Hendrix estate. And he's like, I know you do music down to your core, basically. And I know you can write your ass off. So, let's do this. And it was like you said, one of the things where I was like, fuck yeah. And I have a lot of personal history with Hendrix that makes it really weird too. And so it's like, hell yeah, I gotta do this. It's one of the things where I was like, this is destiny again. And so we pitched on it. And then how it came to the premise is the other side of it. Like, they had the basic idea, as far as I can remember. I think they already had this idea, or Mello already had it, but sorry. I'm pretty sure they had the idea of it being something sci-fi fantasy. They did not want it to be a straight up autobiographical tale of Hendrix. But that's pretty much all they had, And so me and Mello, when we first came together to think about the idea, we both, it's just funny, like I said, how we just have like the same mind in two different bodies, because we both were like, yo, let's talk about Hendrix's Band of Gypsies era. And for those who don't know about Hendrix, he had two main bands, the Experience, which is the one that pretty much everyone knows. And a lot of the songs that people know of him come from that era. And the other thing about Hendrix is he was like Tupac, or Biggie. Like, his run was extremely short, like 4 years in the industry, and then he was gone, dead. And it was like everything he created was in that time. And so the other one is Band of Gypsies, where he gets with Cox and Miles, two black brothers. And they put out this album, the Band of Gypsies album. It's a live album. And that was the first Hendrix album I ever heard. My uncle gave me that. I'd known some of them from samples, that I didn't even realize before that. Like, he was sampled by Digital Underground, which was one of my favorite hip hop groups of all time. And so it was just like all these connections. And so when we both said, yo, let's talk about that era, it was like, yes. And so that's pretty much what we pitched to Jimi Hendrix and the Hendrix estate, was that we wanted to talk about this era. And it's funny you brought that up, because that was in our pitch too. That was a big part of my pitch to her personally, was like, I grew up a super huge Prince fan, but then I'm also, a bit appreciative of Jimmy, but Prince was my guitar god. but I always considered them to be the number one and number two of guitar. And I don't care which way you put it, but I just want you to put those two first. And then you can start talking about all these white boys.
Right.
And even before that, you got to put a lot of other people. Like, you got to really put my man Niles Rodgers from Chic, who people, you know, it's just people don't understand, you know, who the fuck that man is and how much fucking shit he's done, you know?
Right.
So that was a part of our big pitch. Was I was like, I want people to understand this when they start reading this and then getting from this how black Jimmy was. You know, that was like our big thing, and that's something we talk about in every interview. Is like, this was about blackness. And then one of my other big pitches and one of the big themes about it, as you've read, is that it's not just about rock music, it's about black music. Because I have it's an idea that goes back to me. I don't really believe in genres and all that shit. I just believe in black music running the world, and pretty much we've created different forms of music because of technology changes.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it. Like, it's like in America, we've just been creating, like I say, we've been creating blues and protest music since we got here. Yeah. And the technology changes.
There's even a point in the book where you like draw a line from spirituals and folk songs all the way up to rock and roll. And then there's several fun like hip hop Easter eggs, right? Like there's an Outkast reference there. There's a Kendrick reference there. And I'm like, oh, that's dope. That's dope. But no, like it's true. It's funny because it's like all music is black music, like just straight up, like just in the history of Earth, like music is black people.
Yeah,
but you know, so it's interesting.
And so wait, the other, just before you get to the next question, the other answer to that question was, the premise is that the premise of our book is, oh no, because the themes are one thing and the premise is another thing, but the premise is that it's a cosmic space adventure starring a version of Jimi Hendrix where it's in space and Jimmy is on a mission to, his personal mission is to find a spark again. He's reached a point in his career where he feels like he's done everything and he's not getting his message across, that he's not making the music he wants to make. And so it's about finding that spark again and also finding the blackness again for, you know, especially for him. And that's, like I said, that's why we related it to the Band of Gypsies era. We felt like when he went and did that album, it's very, if you go listen to the album, that's where Machine Gun is on, where he's talking about, like, it's one of my favorite moments in recorded music. At the beginning, he says, shout out to all the soldiers in Chicago and all the soldiers in Vietnam too. You know, so it's like he's talking like, he's like, first niggas are fighting a war at home, you know, before we fighting a war over there. And that's just, and Machine Gun is about, you know, the Vietnam War, but he's also saying we are fighting a war at home.
Right.
And so that's a lot of the things we were talking about in the book, because in the larger universe, there is an intergalactic war going on. There's all this other backstory and forward story that we'll get into. But yeah, that was the basic premise, I guess, is about a space story and Jimi Hendrix finding his art again.
Yeah, when I read it, I think the first thing that came to mind for me was Flash Gordon. It was like if Jimi Hendrix was Flash Gordon and had to like bob and weave between different cultures and different space creatures and stuff and kind of ascertain, okay, what are the conflicts, what's going on, and so on. Like, that's who he is in this book to me. And then I guess the other thing that I like, without spoiling any of these plot points, is this book does a great job of, I shouldn't say painting as if it's not true, but presenting Jimmy as revolutionary, right? Like, it very much shows Jimmy as, or Hendrix as, a man of the people, right? A man of principle, right? And a man of action, in ways that even like again, the history that's told of Jimmy is like, he did drugs, he partied, he died at 27, right? Like, and so reading this, like, it's not a biographical book at all, like, but it does feel like through the actions he's taking, you get to know him better, or at least this version of him, in ways that, like, I don't know that I considered any of those characteristics on the historical Jimi Hendrix. And so it's like you're reading this book and it makes you want to go and search out like the real dude, right? Like,
That's man, dog, that's fucking awesome. like you know, that means the world to me, because that was one of our goals. You know, like straight up, like it was something that I probably didn't realize when I started. You know, like I knew about Machine Gun and I knew about that album, but when I started, one of the first things I did was go and read this autobiography. I hate that word. This goddamn book about Jimi Hendrix. I always have. If people know me from my show, I'm the butcher of names. I know way more words than I can ever pronounce. So, yeah, and it was mainly taken from his notes, from his letters, from things of that nature. It's like that Miles book you were talking about, where it's like it was speaking from him, and so it helped me to get to know him, you know, on a personal level. And then we got to talk to Janie, and she would confirm a lot of the things we were talking about. And then, like, my father is ex-military and Mello is ex-military, so we both had those same views. And Jimmy is ex-military, and so we all had kind of a same view on the military and the military-industrial complex. And so that was something we could definitely talk about through him and through this book. We knew all that would work, and that was like I said, that was one of our big pitches, was we wanted people to come away from this realizing Jimmy is way blacker and really cared about his blackness in a way that people don't understand and it's not presented. And it's kind of like the Martin Luther King thing, where that's why they present you this version, because that's the safe version. And that was one of the mandates from the Hendrix estate, is that they didn't really want it to be about drugs and sex and shit like that. And so first I'm like, oh, you know, but then I'm like, no, you're right. Because especially me as a musician, and as someone who's dabbled in a lot of drugs and shit, and especially when I first started, it was like, oh, let me do these drugs because this guy did those drugs and stuff. And you realize you won't make better music by doing drugs. You know, you make better music by fucking practicing. And so it's like, that's what I wanted people to understand about this too. It was never the drugs that made Jimmy who he was. It was Jimmy being a black man and being the god of, you know, not only practicing his ass off, but just being naturally talented and all. But it's that practice that refined that natural talent that made him Jimmy, and it was never the drugs. And so that's was something we really wanted to get across. And it's really awesome to hear that, man, that like it made you want to hear more about him, and you already knew about him. So that's dope. And that it showed you that side of him that, you know, I don't think people are considering yet. And that's crazy, man. Like I said, it's really dope, you know, because you're one of the first people who I've talked to who, you know, and you're definitely the first black person. So, yeah. I talked to one white woman at San Diego. We only had like 15 minutes, and she'd read it, and she was quoting scenes and shit, and it was fucking me up, because I was like, yo, that's, you know, we wrote that. Like, and now you're talking about it. And, and this is, you know, for the listeners, this is, like you said at the beginning, this is my first comic. I've written in TV and stuff, but even in TV, none of the stuff I've wrote ever really made it to screen, at least the way I wrote it. And so this is the first time where I've written something. I've told the story I wanted to tell. I'm beyond proud of the story we told. And so now hearing reactions is really interesting and really awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, no, it's an awesome story. This is the part of the show where I'm going to describe the art to people who are listening on audio. Right? Like, so the art in this book is by Tom Mandrake. Does he color it as well?
No, Justin Prokovich.
Okay.
Shout out that motherfucker too.
Yeah, no, because the colors are awesome. If you guys have read, Hardware Season 1, it's Dennis Cowan and Bill Sienkiewicz on inks. Tom Mandrake's style reminds me a lot of Dennis Cowan, like where it's like it appears sketchy in a way, but the form is all there. And it's just, man, like, so there's a section in this book where you get like the raw pencils, and it looks like
it's finished.
Right. Like, but I'm looking at the pencil strokes, right? And it's like I don't see a rough. I don't
Mm-mm.
see an underdrawing. It looks like that man just put the pencil down, scribbled a little bit, and it was a masterpiece. Like, I don't know how he did it, but it is amazing. Like the layouts, the composition on the pages. There are so many like hidden jimmies in a bunch of scenes.
Oh,
Like,
the second and third page, y'all, is a 2-page splash that is like, I can't describe to y'all the feeling I got and I get. Like I was talking about this earlier. I can say I've probably spent hours of my life just looking at those 2 pages. Like, it's just, and I think the script for that page might be in the book, but if it's not, it was like a paragraph.
mm,
And it's like I wrote a paragraph and Tom just gives me back this, and we have bare descriptions, of like, I don't want to give away what's happening, but it's like
yeah.
bare descriptions of what was happening in the scene, but very bare. And then he just expands upon it to where it's all this stuff. And it's like there's so many stories happening
Mhm,
in this art that you can look at it and see people's lives, like, and their background characters.
mhm,
And he does that throughout this book where it like there's times like he would send me the pencils and I was like, oh fuck, I'm sorry, you might have to redraw this panel, but do this, and then it'll just expand upon the story, in another way, and
mhm,
we can do this later. And it for those also who don't know Tom, because I didn't know Tom, when I was when we got the assignment there, like, your artist is Tom Mandrake, and I didn't really know who the fuck he was, to be honest, because I
mhm,
grew up reading Marvel more than DC. And at that time, Tom, and to this day, Tom has done way more DC than he's done Marvel. And then he's done a lot of independent work, but it's mainly
mhm,
DC and independent stuff. So when they said Tom Mandrake, I was like, cool. And I saw some of his work. I'm like, oh, cool. And then when I started Googling some of his shit. I'm like, oh, this motherfucker can really draw, like, but I
mhm,
still didn't get it. And then I talked to people like Joe Illidge or my man's, artist boy, not Oscar Isaac, Isaac Goodhart, and
mhm,
both of them, when I told them, oh, Tom Mandrake's doing this, it was the same exact expression where their jaw just dropped to the floor,
mhm,
and I was at San Diego Comic-Con the other week, and I'm talking to Tom King, and I'm like, yo, Tom, nice to meet you, I'm Ben Ha Meen, and I got this book coming out, and Tom Mandrake did art, and he's like, what the fuck? And I'm like, yeah, first book. I know, it's crazy. It's like, it doesn't make sense to me either.
right,
So it's like, we're working with this dude who's an absolute legend, like straight up
mhm,
and down. Like, there are, like you said, Dennis. I compare him to like Neil Adams.
mhm,
Dennis is another one because Dennis is classical. It's like it's a classically trained style of comic book artist that there's still people like that now, but it's not like it used to be where most of the cats were trained like this, where they could just draw anything. Like, if you were like, draw me in this room I'm sitting in just like this, Tom
mhm,
could do it, you
right,
know? But
right,
if you're like, or if you're like how Bill Sienkiewicz, another one you mentioned who's just, insane. Like, he can draw the most naturalistic thing ever, but his natural, like the style he evolved into is this very weird, out there shit,
yeah,
but then he can draw like, he could draw me, you perfect. I've seen him do it,
right, right,
Yeah,
right.
and
That's the
Tom's the same way.
yeah,
Like, it's fucking insane. So it's insane working with him, to be honest. Like, that's,
yeah.
yeah.
There are portraits in here, right, that Tom does, and they are just spot on. Like,
Yeah.
you might as well be looking at a photograph of Jimi Hendrix.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are these creatures from outer space that don't exist. And it's like, that is the most amazing thing I've seen today as well. How did we do
Yeah.
both of those things? Like,
Yeah.
it feels like the person that's able to do those portraits should not also be able to do those
Mm.
creatures.
Yep. But
Like,
he's just one of them cats who can just draw anything,
yeah.
because he's like classical, he just draws. So it's like, and that was something else about Tom that I love. Like, when I was first Googling and stuff, I remember I Googled, I'm not sure if it was Swamp Thing. I don't know what comic it was, but it was from the
Mm,
90s. And it was like the cover page or the splash page was a bunch of black dudes in the hood. And they all looked black as fuck. And they looked like they were in the hood, but they weren't caricatures. Like, he
mhm,
had somebody with the Gumby. You know, and I'm like, you know, this the 90s and Negro should have a Gumby. You know, he had somebody else with the fade with the 3, you know, joints on the side. I'm like, okay, Tom. And they all had noses and lips, but they weren't, you know, so I was like, okay, I'm not going to explain to him. I need most of the people in this to be black as fuck. You know, like, and I need white people in this to look white, you know, like even if they're aliens, you know, I need people to get that, you know. And I was like, I'm not going to explain to him that shit. And so we just clicked. And then Tom is like a Jimi Hendrix fan for life. You know, Tom is, I think, 68 years old. So he's a grown ass man, you know, who grew up on Jimi. And so, and he's written and drawn. I mean, he's drawn for everyone great. So it's still mind blowing to me. It's insane that this dude did this book. It's, you know, I'm blessed and ever thankful.
Right. Well, look, Jimi Hendrix Purple Haze, the graphic novel, is out from Titan Comics on August 27th. You need to go ahead and pre-order that. I might push this interview back a week just so that it's right there, fresh on your minds, because you know how y'all do. I'm like, oh, pre-order it. You're like, oh, it comes out in 3 weeks. I'll grab it then. And then you forget, nah, like, you need this book, right? Like, you just do. It's amazing to look at. Again, it's not like a straight up biography. It's not really a biography at all. And so what you're getting is like this spacefaring Jimi Hendrix, who is on a personal journey, who is like discovering things about himself that are clearly taken from real life, but in a completely different setting and under different circumstances than you would ever imagine. And it's drawn by Tom Mandrake. Like, it's great.
Are we done?
Pretty much. I was gonna ask you though, like, obviously you got your first taste of a graphic novel. What are you gonna do now? What are you doing next?
Well, let's see. All right, I'll answer that, and then I had a question for you. So,
Okay.
I'm actually working on a couple more pitches for another. I have 2 books that I would like to do that are like independent books. I'll probably, you know, want to own them, creator own type things. And then one, like you said, please pre-order Jimi Hendrix. I mean, the pre-order is already out, and we're doing very well on pre-orders. I've been told that it looks like, you know, if you know, a little bit more support and everything, we'll probably go to second print. But I'm still waiting to see because, you know, that who knows. But that would be very big for us. And Janie, when I last talked to her at Comic-Con, was definitely interested in doing sequels and stuff. And yeah, there's a lot more story to this. Like, I've been telling people, this to me feels like, well, we wrote it like being like the New Hope of Star Wars, where this is like chapter 4 in a story. And it's the whole, you know, like how New Hope is their whole story. Like, don't get it twisted. You read this graphic novel, you're getting this whole adventure and this whole story. But there's more after and there's more before, definitely, because there's a lot more about it that I want to talk about, and there's characters in it that I wrote so that there'd be more to talk about. So we'll see how that goes, but I would love to do more in this universe. And then I'm also pitching a couple other things at Titan for some of their other properties, so we'll see how that goes as well. But definitely I want to write more comics. I loved it. It's just completely different than writing TV or film, and I really like it. I've also am working on directing a short soon, maybe by the end of this year or beginning of next year. So that's some other things I'm working on. And then, you know, For All Nerds, etc., all the time and all the way.
Word.
But yeah, I just had a question because you have read it. Like, how did you feel about Vesper and Reyna and their story arc?
So basically like the sisters, right? So for me, and I read this book like basically an hour before we did this.
Shit.
But for me, I just enjoyed that they had been through a struggle, right? Like, it is clear, and they have different ideas as to how to address it, right? Like, they're jaded, one's, you know, like, and for me, it served to make the world feel lived in. One thing that, you know, is kind of the gift and the curse of what I do is I get to read books sometimes before they come out. but
Mm.
I always get to read books with watermarks. And so I'm like, all right, let me so there are literally pages where I'm like, all right, I just gotta wait for the book and
Yeah.
I'll read this in full context. So I'm
Mm.
excited to do that with this book, especially. But for me, I do just like that, and not just with Vesper, but with like the one dude with like the cyborg eye and like just
Gaffy.
Gaffy. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. See, I said gaff, but
Yep.
that
Yep.
makes sense.
Yeah.
But reading words, not hearing them. But
Yeah. All good.
all
Yeah.
right. But for me, um all of the cast of characters, right? Like you've got the sort of political landscape, you've got like like you said, it was a commentary on like the military industrial complex.
Hmm.
For me, as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, this feels like it could be a play or a commentary on like exploitation from record labels and then like the
Hmm.
powers that be, right?
Yep.
Like,
That's there
you
too.
know, so the reading in the subtext was cool, but also like I guess you said it already, right? It's like a New Hope where it's like there are these other things like, yeah, you got Luke and Leia, but you've got the Empire, you've got this resistance, you've got bounty hunters, you've got people that have been living this experience long before you found out you were a Jedi,
Mm.
right? And so I just liked how expansive the world felt. And maybe that's cool, or that's big from me because I don't really do cosmic like that because I can struggle to understand like, okay, these different species, how do they relate to one another? What am I looking at? Who am I looking at?
Mm.
But for me, that's the world felt lived in, and the fact that we're sort of traveling to different, I'm calling them cities, but
Hmm.
we're traveling to different urban centers or civilizations or whatever,
Yep.
seeing different ways of life and how this I'm gonna spoil something. I'm gonna stop talking. But we're seeing how one group deals with the way they live and how another maybe takes advantage of that. Like
Mm.
I enjoyed there being a whole world around what Jimmy's searching for himself.
Man, like I said, thank you so much because it's like one, you're the second person, like I said, you're the second person I've talked to who read it, and the second person who said they weren't very much sci-fi or cosmic, oriented people,
Mm,
and they still got it. So that's really, dope to me as well because I think that's the main. Like me and Mello are both like that. We come from writing where it's like, what's the human aspect of the story?
mm,
What is gonna get people locked in beyond all the sci-fi trappings and all the weirdness. But I threw as much weirdness as I could into this book. Like
mm,
there's so much, like you said, little Easter eggs and just all this different sci-fi weirdness going on in the art and in the background. But then we wanted a very human story, not just with Jimmy, but also with these two sisters who are on the cover, and well, one of them's on the cover of Vesper and Raina. And then this whole universe that was a big part of it too, where we came up like with economy and things of that nature, and like, okay,
mhm,
how does this affect this, and why is this going on? So it's just like the type of story that as a kid I would have loved because I just love that type of shit where it felt like you said, where it felt lived in, and I'm just so hyped that it worked, for at least
mm,
for you,
yeah,
it really worked, where it really felt lived in, and it felt like, oh, Jimmy's had this adventure over here, and Vesper's had this adventure over here, and I can tell how that affected them in the present, and
right.
then it leads into what could happen in the future because you've got all this stuff established. So
Mhm.
that's really dope for me, man. Thank you. Like I'm trying to think about any other questions right now, but the other problem is, like you say, you don't want to spoil too much for the audience.
Right.
So, I guess maybe I'll come back or something if possible, after it drops. So that's what it's interesting. That's something I'm really waiting for is to really, really be able to talk about, everything in the book because it's so much shit that I just don't want to spoil for people. So, and I've been trying to figure out how to talk about it. I think we did a pretty good job today of, getting people interested in it at the very
Yeah.
least.
Yeah, for sure. So again, this is out August 27th from Titan
Hmm.
Comics. It's an original graphic novel. It's a hardcover. I think cover price is like 29.99. Um,
It's really beautiful, y'all. Like, let me say that too. It's not just because it's my book and
Right.
because I did it. Like, I was stunned when I got the copy because, like you, I've been reading the PDF for a minute, and the PDF is cool. It's nice, but it just honestly does not. The quality of the print, the pages, everything from the cover, the binding is all solid. Like, I've read so many comics in my life. I've got a lot of collected editions, and this is just a really dope thing. You get. Like you were talking about the script, you get some of my script, you get some Mellow script, you get Tom's pencils, you get all these character designs, a lot of stuff for this package of $30, and it's like solid. And if you order, we actually still have some because we're doing a signing. If you're in New York, you can come through. But August 27th, that Tuesday, we'll be doing a signing at Anyone Comics in Brooklyn. And if you go to Anyone Comics website or my website, biddjenergy.com, there are links there where you can order yourself a signed copy and they'll mail it out nationwide.
Bet. Yep. I'm gonna have to do that then.
Yes, sir. Please.
Because yeah, I need that. I'm mad. You put the book on the screen. I'm seeing how rich the colors are printed on the page. Like the PDF doesn't look like that.
No, it doesn't. It does not, y'all. Like I was stunned myself when I finally got my hands on it. And it's larger than I've ever seen it, because I was always reading on an iPad. So it's like seeing it in this size, but this is larger than standard comic book size too.
Nice.
It's just well, man. It's so well put together. Like it's the colors, the pages, they got the high quality glossy print pages, man. I'm sitting here like, yo. And then this Tom Mandrake and Justin's like just look at these beautiful black women right there. Look at Vesper and Raina right there. Like, and Gaffy right there. That's the man with the scarred face. Yeah. Like, it's just like, man, I'm proud.
You should be. No,
Thank you.
That's insane for that to be your first comic project.
Like, man, it's just, I study anything I do. And I'm not going to put out anything that I feel like isn't good. I'm a perfectionist and then Mello, that's something I have the benefit of having Mello, where this isn't his first comic project. So there were little things he could steer me clear of. But it was also, I just all know that. Like a lot of people's first comic project, they got words all over it because they just don't, they don't know. And I know that as a, so I was like, cut. That was my thing. Cut every line possible, dog. Like, just cut them shits. Like, let this, and then it's Tom Mandrake. Let this motherfucker's art talk. Like,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It sings.
Oh, man. Thank you, man. This is so great.
It is awesome. So, I'm going to put the link I'll give you the Amazon pre-order link in the show notes on the show. Go ahead, grab that. Grab the book. It's out August 27th.
Yep.
27th. Yeah. Grab that. And where can they find you?
They can find me everywhere on the internet at DJ Ben Ha Meen. That's DJ BenHaMeen. That's pretty much everywhere. Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, all of those joints. You can also find me. My website is bigdjenergy.com. where if you leave your email, you'll get some free music. And also you can find a link for Hendrix and get yourself a signed copy right there. biddjenergy.com. Also forallnerds.com for pretty much everything that we do. For All Nerds, the voice of the urban geek podcast where we talk about geek and pop culture from the perspective of people of color. It's hosted by me and my partner, Tatiana King. And you can find us at For All Nerds everywhere as well. We're everywhere on that. FORALL Nerds. And please follow us. Hit us up on YouTube as well. We're all over there. We dropped our House of Dragon review. We just dropped a finale review and it's popping off. So check that out. And that's pretty much everything, right? For All Nerds, biddjenergy.com. And DJ Ben Ha Meen. Yeah, that's pretty much everything I do. Right now.
Well, look, I'm leaving links to all that in the show notes down below.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for doing this.
Oh no, man. Thank
And
you. Thank you so much for having me. It is like for real, this was amazing. I'm just happy to talk to somebody. I've been waiting to talk to people who've read this fucking book. So this is awesome.
awesome, man. Well, look, guys, like I said, go pre-order that book. Links are in the show notes down below. And I don't know what you're doing after you do listen to this, but stay safe, stay awesome, and read something dope today.
Word.
Peace.
Peace.